Hello? Hello? Everyone hearing me okay? Sound volume all right? Plushies looking What? Why are there so many plushies here? Get out! Go away. All of you. Shoo! Out the window. I don't need you. Alright. So what the heck are we doing here today? Man, this... sorry, still adjusting a few things on my end. Alright. So, welcome to the Fangamer artist stream. My name is Eyes5, and I make a lot of Fangamer's plushie projects. Hi there. Anyways, here are some sample projects from things that I've made with them recently, and these are some of the prototypes, like this Shantae plushie. Oops. Which camera? This camera. So this is one of the prototypes I make. What Fangamer does is they will send me a picture of a plushie and say, make this, and then I spit it out, and then we get this. And they'll be like, no, make the head bigger, make the hair different. And I'm like, okay. No, they don't actually say that to me, but not in that tone at least. And then I make it, and I will send it to them along with a pattern and instructions. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but my name is Eyes5, and let's see, I should introduce a little bit about who I am, and what got me here into the plushie making world. Let's see, I've always been interested in plushies. As you can see, I brought this sample here. This is the very first plushie that I made. I made it from a pattern with the help of a teacher, and this is the first Metroid that I made, which is basically a Beanie Baby jellyfish that I sewed 3 nuclei onto. So that counts. That kind of counts. Oop. Let's see. I went to costuming school to make costumes for film, and I've worked on some pretty big films like Descendants and what else? 50 Shades of Grey. That was a good one. And some other stuff. I was recently asked to work on Batwoman, but I turned that down because I'm doing this stuff instead. Let's see. As for my relationship with Fangamer, I've been friends with them for a very long time, back when they were on starman.net, and which was an Earthbound fan site. And I would create comics for them, and eventually I got into making plushies. And they said, hey Eyes, why don't you make some plushies for us? And so I did, and here I am. Let's see. Right, maybe I should explain a little bit more about the collection of stuff that I have that Fangamer has made. So what you saw before was Shantae. So let's see. This is a very recent one. You can buy it at fangamer.com, etc. I also made this Ori plushie. It's really cute. I really like the design. I'm very proud of how the ears turned out because they've got a layer of interfacing on the inside which keeps them stiff, as well as this stuffed part that just gives a little bit of tension. He has wired arms and jointed legs and a wired tail, so he can do all sorts of funny poses. What else? Oh, everything's on the floor now. Ack. This is Quirrell. from Hollow Knight, and his mask is removable. The one here has an elastic around the mask, but I think the official version that you can buy from Fangamer has magnets, so he can wear his mask without an elastic. And this is a prototype version, so it's different than the final version that you can buy, in that his proportions are a little lankier. Being a first prototype, I made this based on the sprites, and the developers got back to me and said, we want him to be more cute, more plushy, shorter proportions, bigger eyes, etc. The same deal happened here with Grim. So I made this Grim based on the sprites in the game. So therefore I tried to express his lankiness. So he's got like big long arms and legs, because in the game he's like this scary insect dude that does fire things. But as a plushie that you can buy from Fangamer, he now has huge eyes and short stubby legs and is adorable. So he can haunt your nightmares in an adorable way. Let's see. Let's see, what else is there? Pretty new to the streaming thing, so everything is just kind of I'm still trying to get used to everything, including technical difficulties. Alright, so what we're going to do today on this Fangamer stream thing is I'm going to teach you how to make a Metroid plushie from start to finish. And you can either follow along with me. I'm going to make like 4 of them, and so you don't have to worry too much about falling behind. Or you can watch this later and make it at your own leisure. What I'd like to go through first is tools. Scissors. 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 I have a lot of scissors. You mostly just need one that's sharp enough to cut through fabric. So you get some nice fabric scissors. And these ones are my shoddy little paper scissors. Generally you don't want to ever use your fabric scissors to cut paper, because that will dull them very quickly. But if you really don't have that many scissors, then one is okay. And I also have tiny scissors for snipping threads. But as you can see, I have this self-healing board here, and that is for using a rotary blade. What a rotary blade does is it will very quickly and very efficiently cut fabric. And if you do it on a board like this, you don't have to worry about hurting your table or the blade. Just, die! All the fabric. It's best for straight lines and not things that have a lot of detail. So when I cut my fabric, I'll be going back and forth between scissors and rotary blades. What else? Pins. Hey, check it out. I have a Metroid pin cushion with pins. I don't know how to zoom on this sucker, but basically they're pins. When you're putting 2 pieces of fabric together, like for example these 2, then what you'll want to do is you just want to pin them, because to hold them in place, because as you sew with your sewing machine, the fabric's going to shift, especially if you're using fabric with a little bit of nap or fur, such as minky. You're also going to need some sewing needles for hand sewing. Even if you're sewing by machine, you're going to be wanting to eventually do some hand sewing, because not everything can be done with a machine. And if you don't have a machine, then you're going to be doing all your sewing with sewing needles. What else? Hemostats and chopsticks. Let's see. I have these implements of torture that are known as hemostats. And you definitely don't need them when you're making plushies, but they're a heck of a help. They're originally doctor tools. You know, if you're a doctor, you'd be like, give me some razors, stat. Give me, oh, stat would be hemostat, I think. I don't know anything about being a doctor. So as an example, if we were to have some stuffing and a piece of something that needs to be stuffed, then you just take a piece of stuffing and you jam it in. But for many years I didn't invest in hemostats, and all I had was some chopsticks. That works. That works, well, not as well, but it works to achieve the stuffing of these small corners. You can use anything that's kind of long and pointed. The back of a pencil, a stick, your tiny little fingers, whatever works. Let's see. Another item I have is a thread rip. And hopefully you won't need this too much, but mistakes happen and that's okay. So what you do with a thread rip is it's got a tiny little blade on the inside of these two prongs. You're just gonna very carefully insert one of the blades into one of the threads and rip. And you do that enough and you can just rip apart two pieces of fabric that used to be together. Is it magical? What next? Needle threader. Okay. Here's something that I generally don't use. This is called a needle threader. So what it basically, the business part of this is, all it is just this little loop of wire. What you do with it is, if you have a needle and it's too difficult to thread, then you stick the needle threader through the eye of the needle, so you see it through now, and you get a bit of thread. Let me find some thread. Doop. And what you do is you stick this thread through the big loop in the needle threader, like this, and then you just pull on the needle threader and it will just draw the thread right through the needle eye. It's that easy. But I don't like to do that. What I do when I want to thread a needle is I just take the end of the thread, I give it a bit of a snip, maybe moisten it a little bit by licking it, and then just kind of use my eyeballs to thread. There we go. There we go. Once you get good enough, you can probably do this without too much trouble. Let's see. There's another tool that's actually not used too often by seamstresses, and I'm like, why don't you do it? It's so useful. Is my tweezers. These are for guiding my fabric when I'm sewing under the machine, because it's got tinier fingers than me and it's got a good grip. I think this one you will see me use it and you'll be like, oh, I've been enlightened. So a lot of people who sew don't use tweezers, they use an awl, which is just a pointy stabby thing. But I'm like, why have one pointy stabby thing when you can have two, you know? Anyways. So that's it for tools. Now for materials. When I first started making plushies, I used fleece. Let's see, here's a piece, here's a thing made out of fleece. And if you can see the texture, it's a little bit mottled, but that's okay. One great advantage that fleece has over a lot of materials is that it's a knit fabric, and the edges, if you can see an edge here, they don't fray a lot when you cut them. So it's very nice for plushie making, and if you're making a Metroid on easy mode, I highly recommend you use fleece instead of minky. Minky makes, oops, let me find a piece of minky here. Here's minky. This is a very shiny, luxurious kind of fabric. Well, maybe not that shiny, but it's very nice to touch. And it's got, if you can see, a little bit of fur. That is called the nap. And the fur has a certain direction. So what makes it a little bit more difficult than fleece is that you have to always be aware of what direction the fabric goes when you cut it. So if I were to make this ball out of minky instead of fleece, I need to make sure all these pieces have the nap, or the fur, pointing downwards. Otherwise, if you can imagine, some of the fur is going this way and some is going that way, and it's just this like bedhead kind of deal if you don't pay attention to it. And even worse is, actually no, this is something you need to be aware of in both fleece and minky, is both of them have a stretch. Here's minky, it stretches. The fleece also stretches. So when you stuff a thing, it's gonna stretch. If you look on, let me see. I pulled up here what the pattern looks like. This is the hard mode pattern for the Metroid. You'll notice that there's purple arrows on all of the pattern pieces. What they show is the direction of the nap or the direction of the grain. So when you cut the fabric, you definitely want to make sure the fur is always going downwards. And if you're cutting fleece, then it can go downwards or upwards, but make sure it doesn't go sideways. Because as well as indicating nap, or the direction of the grain, this arrow also indicates stretch. So stretch is usually against the nap. So nap, up and down on this piece of fabric. Stretch, side to side. If I try to stretch it from up and down, no stretch. So you got to be aware of that. What else? Thread and stuffing. Okay. Let's talk about thread. It's thread. Okay, there's a bit more than that. Just make sure you get all-purpose thread. You generally don't want to sew with like embroidery thread or thread that's too thick. But all-purpose is good. It can handle things. What else? Stuffing. Stuffing is fluff. Ugh. When you're actively stuffing a thing, there's a bit of a technique to it, which I think I'll get to once I get to the stuffing stage of the Metroid. But this is basically it. You can buy some at your local craft store or sewing store, or you can tear apart something, a stuffed something, and use that as stuffing. You generally don't want to use cotton balls, because that will disintegrate. You don't want to use tissues, because what are you thinking? If you're going to use pieces of scrap fabric, then it's probably going to end up being pretty heavy and dense, which is still okay. Ooh, there's another kind of stuffing I just thought about. Let me just reach for it. It's plastic pellets. So if you want to give your plushie like a nice weight on the bottom, then you can stuff a thing with plastic pellets on the bottom and combine it with regular fluffy stuffing. Blop. What else? Okay, let's actually get onto the pattern. So yeah, we have a hard pattern and we have an easy pattern, as you can see from the URL that's given somewhere on the screen there. And it depends on your comfort level in sewing. Actually, wait, shoot, I should talk about hand techniques first. Yeah, let's do that. Let me get a piece of fabric. Let me get some dark thread so you can see what the heck I'm doing. And I'm going to go over 3 main techniques. The straight stitch. Okay, let's first get my thread threaded. There we go. Whoop, nope. False alarm. Here we are. What I like to do is I like to double up my thread to make it extra strong. And you see I have the 2 tips over here. I will kind of level them out together, make a loop, and then put the ends through that loop in order to achieve a knot. And then I will very carefully do that a second time. Make a loop, put the end of the thread through it. Now here's the careful part, is when I'm pulling, I am very careful to keep the loop around the previous knot that I made. so that I can make one mega ultra super saiyan knot. If you miss and your knots end up like in two places, that's okay. Just keep trying. Hopefully you won't end up with like a huge, you know, coin-sized knot. But if you do, hey, it's going to be extra stable. So anyways, here I have my thread. It's all ready. And I'm going to teach you the straight stitch. I should sew two things together. So you will put two pieces of fabric together, line them up, and sew along what is called the seam. The seam is going to be the stitch line that I make. You will put your needle through both pieces of fabric, and then take your needle and from the back side put it through again about 1/4 of an inch, probably less than 1/4 of an inch away, and do it again and again. Wow. Sometimes your thread is going to get a little bit tangled. Oh, that's another thing. When you're cutting your thread, you actually want to make sure you don't cut like a huge long line, even if you're going to like stitch a huge long stitch or seam. Because what happens is the thread is going to get tangled, and each time you're pulling like all the way out into the wild, and it's going to be tiring for your arms. It's going to be very inefficient. So it's best to go with actually a shorter thread and to tie it off and start a new one when you run out of thread. Anyways, I can do this. You want to make sure you don't pull on it too much, otherwise you get an accordion effect. So you see here's a nice seam, but if I pull on it too hard, it becomes ruffled. You don't want that, unless you want that, weirdo. What you're making here, and this is just a bit of terminology, is a seam line, and the space that's between the seam line and the raw edge of the fabric is called the seam allowance. That becomes pretty important because there's going to be a lot of seam allowance control and removal. Anyways, that's a straight stitch. And if you want to end your straight stitch, you're going to have to tie it off. Here's how I like to tie it off. First, I go backwards one. I do a back stitch, kind of near, if you can see, near the previous little stitch that I made. Okay, now I'm on the back. And what I'll do is I'll put my needle through the previous stitch that I made. And I won't put it through the fabric, or I try not to. I'll just do it because bleh. Okay, and here you see we have a little loop happening. And as you pull it, the loop gets smaller and smaller, but before it disappears completely, put your needle through it again. Put your needle through this loop. And you see now you have this bigger loop and a smaller loop. And as you pull, the bigger loop gets smaller and smaller. Now before the big loop becomes too small, okay, you see how I'm holding on to the loose end of the fabric, of the thread. I'm going to pull on the big loop to make the small loop disappear. Now there's only the big loop. And now I'm going to kind of press my finger on this whole knot to make sure the knot doesn't unravel as I pull on my needle and loose thread. Ah, it's done. So that is a straight stitch and tying off. The next stitch I'm going to teach you is the whip stitch. This is going to be important if you are doing easy mode, making an easy mode Metroid, and you don't have a sewing machine, and you're doing it all by hand. So what this does is, let me get another piece of fabric, if I can find one in here. Ooh. So what this does, what I'm going to do is show you the whip stitch, and what it's best for is a technique called applique. The term applique basically means throwing fabric right on top of fabric without like with the raw edges showing. So this is why I recommend fleece for the easy mode, because the difference between easy mode and hard mode is how the nuclei are attached to the plushie. Ooh, I need some water. Hard mode has the nuclei of the Metroid inserted right into the body of the Metroid, while easy mode has the nuclei just appliqued on top using either a top stitch with the sewing machine or whip stitch. Maybe I shouldn't have done brown. I'm going to look for a lighter color fabric. Oh, here's a nice piece. So you want to put the right side of the applique fabric right on top of the right side of the fabric you're sewing on. And you want to start from the underside of the fabric you're sewing on, get a stitch in there, and go through both fabrics. And I give it only a very little distance. And then I go right back through the fabric, but I go through, instead of going through both pieces of fabric, instead of going through both, I'm going through just the base fabric. And then I will go to the back of the fabric, put it in again, oops, and again put it through both the top and the bottom fabrics. It ends up, I'm going to say like it looks like a whip, but I'm like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Even though it's called the whip stitch. I think it's more of the motion, is that it looks like the thread ends up looking like the motions that you do. So you see this partially encases the raw edge of the applique fabric, the top layer, and just holds it down. So there we go. If I were to go around all of this, then it would hold down this fabric, and it's, you know, good for patches and stuff like that. So I'm going to finish it off and show you how I tie off again. So I'm going to insert my needle near a previous stitch I made. I'm going to stick my needle through a loop of thread. Now I have this small knot, small loop. Put my needle through this small loop to make a big loop. I'm going to pull on the big loop to make the small loop smaller until it disappears. There we go. I'm going to hold on to this knot and pull it until the big loop disappears. Ugh. What the heck? There we go. And now I can cut it off. Let me take a moment to read the chat because my setup is so inefficient. I have to switch screens to look at the chat. Anyone said anything important to me? No. Why are people honking at me? What's going on? I don't understand. Okay. I've mentioned before, I've mentioned in passing about good side and bad side of fabric, and I don't think I talked about why that is. It's kind of obvious. Well, maybe not sometimes. Good side of this minky is nice and fuzzy. Bad side is ugly and mean. No, it's probably nice. I don't know. I don't talk to it very often. Usually when you're sewing plushies together, you're putting their right sides together. I said good side and bad side. Heck, I'm confusing everyone. But it's like right side and wrong side. So if I were to put these two pieces of minky together, I would put their right sides together. I would sew along this edge, and I'm holding, like the places I'm touching are their bad sides, so that when I turn the plushie inside out, only the right sides will be showing. Doop doop doop. Okay, everyone got it? You're all an expert on how to do plushie techniques? I'm sure you'll get the hang of it. Let's see, what's next on my list? Ooh, cutting patterns. Well, I already cut my patterns. If you want to cut your pattern, you just need to print it out. I should, shoot, did I put, no, I didn't put measurements on these patterns. But don't worry about it. They should fit on an 8x11 paper, the 2 patterns that I have available. And you can cut them out. You'll want to cut them out along the black line and leave the blue line. The blue line is more of a guide than anything else. Unless if you're pro or not pro, you could cut out on the blue lines and then draw in your cutting lines. The blue lines are the seam lines, those are the lines that you want to sew along. This is my pattern. It's been previously cut, so it's not quite the same as your pattern. Shoot, where's my... Am I missing a piece? Ah! Well, darn. Well, I'll make it up. Doesn't matter. Now, how I like to cut my patterns... Let's start this sucker. I'm going to cut these fangs first. Alright, this is... Okay, I'm going to switch this camera now. There we go. So this is fleece. And how I tend to cut all my pattern is by folding the fabric in half so I can cut 2 at a time. You got to be a little bit careful when doing this though, because you have to be aware of where the grain or the stretch or the nap is on all of your fabric. So a good way to do it is to make sure the selvages are touching. Oh, more terminology. What the heck is selvage? Selvage is when you take a piece of fabric that you buy from the store, you often have this this rough edge that is used in manufacturing the fabric. All these little dots, if I understand correctly, are from the machine gripping the fabric as they weave it. So if you put those two together, then you're sure to get fabric that runs the same direction. And in the case of minky and fleece, this always indicates the direction of grain, if not nap. The grain will be in the direction of the selvage. The stretch will be in the direction opposite to the selvage. Stretch. No stretch. Ugh. So anyways, once you double it up, then you can cut 2 pieces of fabric at the same time. So I got a fang here, and on your pattern it will say cut 4 times 2 flipped. Now what the heck does that mean? What it means is that if you cut 2 pieces, if you cut 2 pieces of fabric exactly the same and you sew them together, then you turn them inside out, one side is going to be on the good side of the fabric, but the other side is going to be on the bad side of the fabric. It's a mirror kind of deal. However, if you have folded your fabric such that the right sides are together and is on the selvage, then when you cut them, let's start this process. What's going to happen is you cut, automatically you'll have 2 pieces, and automatically they will be flipped. They are inverse from each other. I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but you can see these 2 sides are the fuzzy sides, and they're mirrored to each other. And their back sides are the not fuzzy sides. Yeah, fleece, it's a little bit hard to tell which side's good and which side's bad. So there's one big fang that I just cut. Now that was, if you saw, I pinned this pattern piece to cut it out. Some people prefer to draw right onto the fabric, and there's nothing wrong with that. And here I have some potential tools that you can use. You can freaking use a Sharpie if you like. Just go, I'm gonna cut along here. It doesn't matter if a little bit of the black shows up in the seam allowance, because it's a seam allowance. It's going to be hidden. Just be careful not to actually get this on, you know, the body of your fabric. Now I have this pen. I have a few versions of this pen, actually. These are called Frixon pens. That's the brand. And they're really nice because they're heat activated or friction activated or erasable pens. And they're really nice because what you can do is you can draw with them. I'll just draw here. And you can take them to an iron and iron them, and they will come right off. Some people like to use them for, and in fact I think they're mostly sold as non-sewing applications, because you can just, let's see, you can just write, and they come with like a little, basically a piece of rubber to create some friction. And once you create that friction, it just makes enough heat to just make it disappear. Now go away, Frixon pens. I don't use you. So I'll just cut these two pieces out. Ta-da! I said before I was going to make 4 Metroids, but I'm looking at the time now going like, I should make less than that. It's always hard for me to estimate exactly how much time a plushie will take me. People always ask, oh, how long does this plushie take you? And I'm like, I don't know. Because it's not like I work like hours on end on a plushie. I will do a little bit of it, and then I will watch some TV, get distracted by Twitter. And especially when I'm designing, like sometimes, like it's the same as writing or a lot of other kinds of art. You sometimes just need a break to figure stuff out. I guess it's a lot like math too. Trying to solve a math problem, if you remember your old math days, trying to figure something out that's really complicated. You just need maybe a day to sleep on it or to do something else and come back. And then you'll have figured out a new novel solution for the problem that you're facing, because it's a lot of problem solving too. Okay, just gonna take a moment to read the chat. Alright, so here are the pieces for one Metroid. Hard mode and easy mode are exactly the same. Each one is doubled up. If you can imagine, they're going to be little Metroid fangs. So cute! I love Metroids, in case you couldn't tell. Alright, guess I'm done with white for now. Okay, I'm going to rummage in here to see if I can find my nuclei pattern, because that's the part I'm missing. Aha, here it is. Now here's one of the big differences between the easy mode and hard mode. is easy mode, you're going to have a smaller nuclei pattern, and it's not going to have these tabs. Oh, I didn't talk about the tabs. They're used in the, like, when I make a pattern, I like to make tabs to help line things up. So if you look on the body of the pattern, like the body of the Metroid on the pattern, you will notice it has corresponding tabs where the holes, where the Metroid, where the nuclei should be. When you're making clothes, oftentimes in clothes patterns, they don't use tabs, they use notches. And what notches are is the opposite. I'm just going to destroy my pattern a little here. Instead of a... No, I don't want to destroy it. It'll make me cry. Basically, it's just inverted. It would be a cut inside instead of a protrusion outside. Now, the reason I don't do that is because... Okay, now I'm not an expert in manufacturing, but from what I can tell, like, the way you mass manufacture things is often a lot faster than you would when you're trying to create clothes in your home studio or whatever. And they will cut fabric using machines or lasers or whatever. So they don't have time to make notches. Like, usually a notch is made after you cut the pattern, and then you go in afterwards to snip, 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 snip to make the notch. But when you have a tab, that is easier for them to cut out, and it still gives the information about where to position your piece when you're sewing it together. What else? So usually when I cut my fabric, I can be a little bit reckless. I don't have to be super careful because all of my cut edges are going to be seen, like, are going to be hidden on the inside. They aren't going to be seen. However, in this case, if you're making easy mode, your nuclei are going, the raw edges of the nuclei are going to be seen on the outside of your plushie. So if you have only so much effort into cutting, then this is where you want to put it. You want to make sure that you cut perfect circles if you're doing easy mode. If you're not doing easy mode, I should have cut this on a fold. I do the thing where I pin the fabric, pin the pattern to the fabric, so I can cut two at once. And now I got 3 nuclei. Okay, put these aside for now. And now we're going to do the body pieces. This is going to be fun because now I'm going to... The lines are straight enough that I can use my rotary blade for some of these pieces. Oh, I got a big old chunk of green fleece here. Okay, I'll turn out the background music a little. How's that sound? Okay, rotary blade. I got an ergonomic one. This is a kind where you kind of squeeze it and the blade comes out. And you kind of go like this, as opposed to the non-ergonomic types, which I don't even remember. I don't even use my old one anymore. And you gotta be careful, this sucker is really sharp. It will hurt you. Oh. So like any kind of heavy-duty machinery, or light-duty in this case, you just want to be respectful of it. And try not to kill yourself. So you see, it's giving me a bit of a rough suggestion of a pattern, and I'll have to go back with scissors to nice up the edges. A little awkward because I'm working at my computer table right now, and this is not usually where I cut my fabric. I should be standing when I'm using my rotary blade. Alright, we got 4 of the body pieces so far, and now I'm going to cut this last one, which has the holes for the nuclei. I'm going to move this camera slightly. There we go. So once again, I'm always cutting in the direction of the selvage. The selvage is over here. So you see my pattern, the direction is kind of up and down. So I make sure that it's up and down, aligned with the selvage. see, my favorite to teach people to make. I don't know. I think it might be Mr. Saturn's, but I already taught that at camp, at the Camp Fangamer, which is an event that happened a few times since 2015. And I would usually run some sort of plushie event happening there, whether it be selling plushies or how to make plushies. So once I taught people how to make tiny Mr. Saturns and tiny little Tendas and tiny fuzzy pickles. Let's see, text size of the chat overlay. I'm afraid I have no idea how to increase the text size of my chat overlay. And I'm a little scared to mess with anything right now, since I had technical difficulties in the beginning. Alright, here's the centerpiece for my Metroid plushie. You see that the nuclei are going to go here, and you can see that, well, maybe you can see how both of them right here is their good sides, and their undersides are their bad sides. Although it's hard to tell on this webcam, I think. Let's see, the last piece is going to be the bottom piece. And I'll cut two of those just so I have two, even though you only need one. Alright, so now we have all the pattern pieces that we need. Ta-da! Get out of here, fabric. Ugh. Okay. What do I do next? Oh yeah, okay. First we're going to work on the fangs. So each of these fangs, I make sure that their right sides are facing each other. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew them down their curved edges, leaving the top straight edge open. So I'm just going to put a pin in. I only need one. If you need more than one, then go ahead and put a bunch. There's a little bit of a skill when it comes to pinning. Some people like to pin at right angles to the seam. Some people like to pin directly on where the seam would be. So you see this one would go, since the seam goes downwards like this, vertically, this pin is horizontal. Over here, the seam would be going horizontal, and the pin is also horizontal. There's actually a purpose for each of those ways. Each of them has their advantages, which is basically how the fabric slides. When you put a pin like this, it's not going to slide up and down very much. the fabric will not want to move. Let me just take this out. The fabric will not want to move up and down. If you put it in the other direction, the fabric will not move side to side. And that is and oftentimes, especially when you're sewing things that have a slipperiness to them or a nap that makes them slippery, they're going to want to go in a particular direction. So you will put your pin in depending on what you want to counterbalance. A lot of people like to do it horizontal simply because when you're sewing with the machine, you don't need to take your pin out until you get right to the pin. While if you pin along the seam, then you gotta take the pin out right when you're around here, and then you have all this area that's not pinned. But there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, I don't need my rotary cutter. I don't need my self-healing board. It's called a self-healing board because it, like, what happens to all the cuts that I make? It just kind of disappear. Go away. I don't need you anymore. Here comes my sewing machine. If you are making this by hand and you don't have a sewing machine, that's okay. Just use the straight stitch that I showed you before, and it can do everything that a sewing machine can. The sewing machine just does it faster and more evenly. So I'm going to put in my white thread. Put in white thread into my bobbin. These are bobbins because the sewing machine, what it does is it, instead of a hand stitch in which you have a single thread kind of going up and down into a fabric, obviously a machine can't do that. So what it does is it makes a loop. This needle will make a loop of fabric underneath the machine, or not a loop of fabric, a loop of thread underneath the fabric, underneath the machine, and devices at the bottom will like make the bottom thread go into that loop and kind of just make a series of loops. So anyways, I put my bobbin into the bobbin casing. There's like a specific way to do it to make sure the tension's all good. I thread my needle. And I can do my stitching. Where's that? Ah, here's the tweezers. These are my secret weapon. So in case you have a sewing machine that you want to try but you're not too familiar with it, what you want to do when you're sewing a seam is you first want to do maybe 2 stitches forward, a few stitches back. That will lock the thread. So it's basically the same as doing a knot at the beginning and the end of your seam. So I didn't draw on my seam allowance, the blue line that's, or not seam allowance, the seam line, the blue line that's on the pattern, because I don't need it. I know exactly how much like 3/8 of an inch is, given how far it is from the edge. Once you get to the end of your seam, you backstitch a little bit to lock it up. I'm gonna change the angle of this camera a slight bit, or maybe just my machine. I don't know if this makes things any clearer. Oh well. See, another thing I'm doing right now is called chaining. Instead of cutting the thread, I'm just gonna go and sew my next thing. And then by the end of my sewing project with the white thread, I'm just gonna have this chain of things hanging out the back of my machine. It's just more efficient, because why waste time picking up scissors, cutting things, putting them back down, and then sewing, and then having to do that all over again when you can just cut everything at the very end. So when you're using a sewing machine, you want to be careful going around corners. You want to make them a little bit round. So I use a lot of pins, or maybe not that many, but I'm trying to learn to use less, because the more pins you use, the slower your progress is, even if pins are important for keeping fabric behaving when they try to be naughty. But especially in, or as I understand, in mass manufacturing, they don't have time to waste with a lot of pins. Also, having pins means a risk of metal getting into your plushie, and that's bad. Because, you know, you can lose pins. You don't want any sharp things in your baby toys. So okay, so now I'm at the part where I'm just cutting off the threads. I hear that when they're making jeans, like mass manufacturing jeans, that whole length of the leg, you're not allowed to use pins, and you have to do it in one stitch or one seam. You can't start and stop. You just go brrrr and you get one side of the leg. That's how you be efficient. So we got these fangs now. As you can see, we've got the seam line and we have seam allowance. Now, whenever you have any kind of sharp corner, even this is considered somewhat sharp. Even this outer curve might be considered a little bit sharp. Anyways, what you want to do is you want to remove that. Because if you can envision in your brain mind, when you try to turn this inside out, all of the fabric that's on the outside here is going to be on the inside of the plushie. So if it's too much material, it's going to be this bulk, this hard bulk inside the tip of whatever it is you're making. So you want to avoid that as much as possible by trimming the seam allowance. Now I might want to also trim all the way around this outer curve, because that material is also going to interfere with how your plushie is going to look once it's turned inside out. You also often want to remove any inner curves if they're too sharp. I like to call it the crotch of the fabric. So anytime you have, like, for example, an armpit. Actually, I have a little bit of an armpit here. Here's a new plushie that I'm kind of in the middle of working on, just as an aside. Yeah, actually, why don't I remove the seam allowance of this sucker, just so you can see how much seam allowance removal should happen in a plushie. Anytime there's a crotch of fabric, for example, between the fingers, I definitely want to snip here all the way into almost cutting the thread, but not quite. You definitely don't want to cut it. I want to remove this part where the thumb joins the arm. Just give it a snip. And then I want to remove all of this around this quote-unquote sharpness. All of this around the fingers. Yeah, I've been working on new plushies just on my own Twitch streams. Unfortunately, I can't do any of the plushies I'm like actually working on like for manufacturing, obviously because they're under NDA, which is kind of sad. I mean, like, wouldn't it be fun if you guys could see this new beep that I'm working on and see how cool it is, and the fact that this developer Beep is creating this new game Beep. See, there's a little bit of excess. I don't have to trim this area, like right above the arms, but it's a little bit bulky, so I'm going to trim it anyways. And here's a crazy part. Underneath the armpits, not only does it have like a regular amount of seam allowance, it also has an excess amount of seam allowance from where the arm meets the body. So I definitely want to get rid of that as much as I can. Ooh, and I know, for the sake of demonstration, I won't remove... Heck, I think I cut the thread here. Forget you saw that. Anyway, I'll remove the seam allowance from here. And I will use my hemostats to turn the sucker inside out. And then for the sake of demonstration, I will turn... I better remove all this. Shoot, do I have one that's not... Here we go. I will also attempt to turn inside out one that I have not cut the seam allowances of. Alright. Turn inside out. Here's where hemostats can come in real handy, because I will just use it to get into this arm. And I'll just grab the edge of it and whoop, comes right out. Look at that, cute little fingers. Okay, this one doesn't have any legs yet, but that's okay. Who needs legs when you have arms like these? Okay, now I'm going to try to turn this one inside out, and it's going to be a nightmare because I'm not going to be able to get the fingers turned inside out. There's going to be a lot of rippling along the armpits, so just for the sake of demonstration, you'll get to see that. Well, Space Coyote, once I finish off with these new plushies, then they'll probably gonna need a home. Go to Etsy or EtsyMetroidHat.com or something. I can't remember the URL. Buy my stuff. Make me rich. Okay, you can already see how the armpits have this weird... You can feel it more than you can see it. But it's just... has a weirdness to it. This one doesn't have that. And now, watch the disaster of the fingers. Yeah, I can't even... Yep. Yep. Nope. Nope. They're just not. And now you know why you have to clip seam allowances. So back to this sucker. Oh, my music has ended. Let's just restart that. Okay. So now I just use my hemostats, or I'll demonstrate with a chopstick to turn these suckers inside out. There we go, there's a pleasant little fang. I don't want to use chopsticks anymore. I'm going to use my hemostats. It's just so much easier. Alright, now we want to give them a little bit of stuffing. So the way I stuff is very time consuming, but it gives great results. The key is to fluff up your stuffing first, and then do a tiny bit at a time. If you do a huge lump at a time, it's going to feel like a huge, ugly lump inside your plushie. And I try not to stuff too stiffly. Depends on what I'm doing. But in this case, you actually want to keep it kind of nice and floofy. What's been happening in my sewing adventures recently that I can actually tell people about? Ooh, here's something fun I've been making. And I plan to have patterns for these out in probably next week. So I'm just going to take off my headset now because I'm going to need to take it off in order to show you these. What do y'all think? Yeah, I'm making Kirby and Boo face masks, but I'm only going to be making the pattern for them. I don't want to make them individually. So they'll be available on my website. So maybe with the skills you learn here, you can go and make your own. Yeah, I know I wore these just to go shopping and got a lot of compliments. I'm like, yeah, these are fun. These are great. Because I see a lot of masks that are just, you know, they have fun fabric, but I'm like, I don't want just the fabric to be interesting. I want the design to be interesting. I thought about doing a Mr. Saturn. I don't know, like, to make a whole separate nose go over the mask. The thing is, like, you know, there's a utility to this as well. I can't make it too heavy. And I can't make it so that it blocks off your breathing or it becomes ineffective as a mask. And also, the Mr. Saturn would have, like, a ribbon coming up top and whiskers coming to the side. And I'm still figuring out how to make stiff things that can go through the wash, because that's another consideration, is these masks have to go through the wash. See, alright, these fangs are sufficiently stuffed. Now it's time to work on the body. This is how I usually work. I will have my sewing machine at my computer desk, and I just drag it back and forth as I need it. I'm just changing the thread now. This is a good color, maybe. So a bit of extra terminology is sewing machine parts. This part of the sewing machine is called the foot. That's pretty simple to remember. It's like a foot. It steps on things. With a lever in the back, you control whether or not it steps down, and you usually want it to step down to hold the fabric. Down here, I don't know if you can see it, but if you watch, let me see if I can make this happen. Yeah, it's kind of not showing up too well. Oh, maybe a tiny bit. But this part moves as the needle moves. Those are called the feed dogs. I don't know why they're called dogs, but I understand the feed. They kind of feed the fabric. You don't need to push fabric through your machine. The feed dogs will grab it and feed it through the needle, which doesn't move. The needle itself doesn't move. And therefore you get your length of stitches. There's dials, like on the top of the machine here, that control how distant each stitch is, and that will change how distant the feed dogs will feed your fabric every stitch. So I want to stitch from the top of each piece to the bottom. And these stitches are kind of small. I'm going to make them a little larger. So there's one set, and I will just go on to the next set. Now you might notice the top of the pattern of these. The top is round. However, if you look at the blue lines on the pattern piece, you'll notice that the blue line is sharp. So the fact that this is round is just to remove a little bit of seam allowance without having to remove it later. This just becomes a little easier to sew. But you're not actually supposed to make a round stitch. You're just supposed to treat this as if it ends like quite sharply, and then it will begin again. Another stitch will begin again here later. I hope that made sense. Now if you are doing easy mode, then your next piece will look exactly like one of these, and you just sew it exactly the same way. If you're doing hard mode, then you're going to have to deal with this piece that has holes in it. Basically the same. But once you reach the hole, you want to stop and start again underneath. Okay, I'm going to snip threads. And I'm going to take these two normal-ish pieces and I'm going to pin them together. And I'm going to try to start my first stitch at the top so that it's right around the top point of each pattern piece, of here and also of the piece behind it. I'll try not to miss because I want them all in the end, all these stitches to meet at a point. But if you miss it, it's not a big deal. You can always go back and just kind of hide it. Alright, that's not too bad. So 4 of the pieces are connected now. You can see it kind of makes a half-dome body. But this piece is going to be interesting. If you are working on the easy mode, your piece is not going to have holes. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your nuclei pieces and pin them. So I'm just pretending here. Pretend that this is the easy mode version. And you're going to pin them on. And if you're doing this by hand, whip stitch around the nuclei in order to get them onto the green parts. If you're doing this by machine, you can actually edge stitch to applique the nuclei onto the body. So I'm going to do a sample with some other fabric of what top stitching is going to look like. Let me just grab some garbage fabrics. My scrap fabric box is right here. Ooh, I have green. How handy. Do I have a piece of fleece somewhere? Oh, here's a piece. Haha. So ideally you actually want to pin on all 3 nuclei first, just so... Where's my last nuclei? Heck. Oh, here it is. So you want to pin them all on first. Now, once again, this is easy mode. You want to pin them all on first, just so they're positioned correctly. And I'm going to do a sample of what top stitching by machine looks like. I'll pin it on. Here's where I also recommended you use fleece if you're doing easy mode, because it does top stitching really nice. It does this top stitch applique. If you're using minky, then what's going to happen is, like, the raw edges of minkies just don't look very nice. So I like to keep those as hidden as possible. Anyway, you just have to very carefully stitch both pieces of fabric together. See, edge stitching foot. I assume, oops, should I hit the camera? You're asking, do you ever use an edge stitch foot? Okay, let me just dig in my feet boxes. I assume you mean compensating feet, which looks a little bit like this. It has like a ridge so that the fabric doesn't go past this ridge. Is that what you're talking about? Because this is a compensating foot. Oh, it's got a bit of a spring to it as well. Alright, so yeah, that's, we call this, well, I've always called it a compensating foot because it compensates for your lack of skill. Because I can achieve a relatively even edge without using a compensating foot. And that foot that I had there is used with my industrial machine, so it's a very powerful piece of machinery, which maybe if I have time I'll talk about later, what my industrial machine does compared to a domestic machine, which is what I have here. Anyways, as you can see, I have this delightful little applique. If I want, I can just go back in and trim. And this is also why I said before to be very careful when you're cutting the nuclei on the easy mode, because these raw edges are going to show. And I didn't sew too carefully, so therefore it does look a little bit rough. But I could just trim it. I'll make it beautiful. You can be beautiful! Alternatively, another way you can achieve top stitching, which maybe has less of the raw edges showing, is you can take a domestic machine and do a zigzag stitch. Now the problem with that is if you're gonna be doing this on a stretchy fabric, and if you've ever embroidered anything with an embroidery machine, you'll know that things don't, like stretchy material will stretch when you're sewing it, and it will stretch a heck of a lot when you're trying to do a zigzag on it, a very dense zigzag. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need a piece of like something not stretchy, some sort of stabilizing fabric, like this cotton something, and just layer it. That will help keep your fabric from warping once you do a zigzag stitch in order to do an applique. So let me just change my machine settings. I'm going to do a relatively large zigzag. Right, check that out. So that's another way you can do applique, by doing a zigzag stitch. So, okay, that's easy mode. Hard mode. How is it different? Okay, get out of here, sewing machine. This is where we separate the girls from the women. So, the idea is you're going to insert the nuclei into the body. Now, you're like, wait a minute. This hole is smaller than this. What the heck's going on? I say. The actual sewn area, which would be smaller than the red nuclei, and you'll see it on your the pattern sheet. It's that blue circle inside the nuclei. It's a certain size, and there's also a blue circle around each of these holes, which would be the same size as the blue circle of the red nuclei. However, the diameter of this actual piece of fabric, the seam allowance, is bigger than this outer edge. So what we're going to do is we are going to force this outer edge to be bigger. Now, how are we going to do that? The answer lies in clipping. What we're going to do is clip into the seam allowance of this edge. Oh gosh, these scissors are not sharp anymore. Where the heck's my sharp ones? Here they are. And there goes my box of news. It just fell down. What? This is not sharp either? Okay, alright. Big guns. There we go. How do I sharpen scissors? Let me get my scissor sharpening device. Give me a second. Okay, this is my scissor sharpening device, and this is actually not the way I recommend you sharpen scissors, but it's a way. It's got like little sharpening stones on the inside here that are kind of rolly. And they are at the perfect angle of scissors. So you just kind of run your scissor through them. Hope I didn't just ruin my scissors. Oh no, it's just the residue. Oh, that feels a little nice. Oh, mixed results. Still not as good as a professional sharpening. Some people say that if you cut a few layers of tin foil, that will help sharpen your scissors. Sure, give it a try. Can't hurt. However, if I need to sharpen my scissors, I get them professionally sharpened. I go to House of Knives and be like, hey, make this sharp. And I shall do that. What is this link? I'm not going to click it right now. Sorry, Weenie Town. Wonder if that sharpener will use for tiny scissors. Anyways, where was I? I was cutting this. So, like I said, I'm going to make this inside edge bigger. And I have. Check it out. Once you cut a bunch of tabs, now this outer seam allowance is not a hindrance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin. How am I going to do this? Using the tabs, so you see how the nuclei has a top tab and a bottom tab, and these holes all have either a top tab and a bottom tab, or simply the seam. I'm going to use that to line up the nuclei. And I will use a lot of pins here. Well, if you're still here, Symbiote Studios, you mentioned that the factory doesn't use pins, and I'm like, how? How do they not use pins for things like this? Am I making a leaf baby? I'm making a Metroid. Guess it could be a leaf baby. Oops. Ah, sorry. I just hit my mic. So okay, now it's this warbled thing, but it gives me the path along which to sew. So I will sew along the outer edge. Let's just do that. And here's also where my little tweezers come in super handy. Because even though I put a ton of pins in, the fabric's still going to want to misbehave. Like, I'm trying to make it do things that are eldritch and unnatural. Wow. Of course, if you're doing this by hand, it's actually a heck of a lot easier. Oh heck, oh no, this was still on zigzag mode. Well, I get to use my seam ripper now. Oh no, it came apart. That's good. because I'm sewing something round, I'm making sure to change the direction I'm sewing, like pretty much every few stitches. I'm also being careful not to sew any wrinkles, any green wrinkles into this, because that's what the fabric's going to want to do. It's really wrinkling along the side. I don't know how much you can see that. But my hands, this hand, my left hand, is trying to control the green fabric as much as I can. I'm also being aware that all these little clips that I've cut make it so that there's a lot of areas where I could potentially miss my stitch and there will be a hole in in your final plushie, and you don't want that if possible. So does anyone have any particular questions about plushie making? Or about my history with plushies or anything plushies? Just ask me plushies, ? And I'll say yes, plushies. Oh heck. No, it's not bad. Look at that. Look at this cute little nuclei. Let's see, is this going to be okay? Oh, my favorite plush. I have him right here. Let's see if there's a good angle to see him at. This is Wimpod, the Pokemon. I think he is one of my most successful plushies because, like, there's all sorts of mechanisms. Oh, jeez. There's all sorts of mechanisms within him that are kind of invisible to the naked eye. Like, there's a layer of buckram in his whiskers and and it's got wire fused to it, and the wire is also hand sewn onto his face. There's also a layer of buckram and wire in his tail to keep it flat, and also a layer of batting to keep it soft, and a layer of wire so it can move. There is like 3 layers of structure inside his shell in order for several things to happen. Mostly in order to make this lip, which had to, like, the only part I hand sewed aside from the antenna, well, actually no, I have a few parts that I hand sewed, but I had to hand sew all along here and all along this side in order to establish this ridge. And the construction in there also makes it so that I could sew down this part and hold the shell together, and also have this little spike line, like, kind of fall quite smoothly against his body. He's got all kinds of little angles and structures happening in his face in order for it to curve exactly how I want it to, without resorting to a lot of seams. Like if you were to actually lay this sucker out flat, like all his pieces, they would just not make these angles. I don't know if any of that made sense. I think his legs are pretty elegantly made. You can't really see any seams along the belly, and there's a minimum of seams between each leg. And yeah, in fact, each leg is actually just one piece of fabric, even though there's a number of seams to control its shape, but it's one piece of fabric. And they kind of do this cute little movement when I stroke his belly. Yay, wind pods! Let's see, is this more relaxing or stressful? I don't think I would ever call plushie making stressful. I think it's more relieving than stressful. Unless I'm on a deadline. And that only ever happens if I'm making like clothes for costuming or something. Then it's very stressful. I don't like deadlines. I think it's more just the deadline that's making me stressed. Yeah, when it comes to making plushies, oftentimes the planning is a lot more important than, or not a lot more important, but it has to happen. I have to plan it all out before I commit to fabric. I can't just kind of start and then be like, oh, maybe I'll do it like this. It's like, no, it's too late. I've already committed to things. I've already made mistakes, and now I can't go back. And I'd rather not do that, so that's why I do all my planning beforehand. And it usually results in like pages and pages of sketches that don't mean anything. Like, do I have pages of sketches here that I can show? Oh, they're all of NDA projects. Pet peeve of plushies you see on the market. Okay, I hope I'm not insulting anyone by saying this. Maybe not manufacturing stuff, because I understand there's a lot of things that manufacturers have to work with. Like, so sometimes if their plushies don't turn out perfect, I'm like, dude, you've made 6,000 of them. You deserve a little bit of grace. But when I see like individual artists making plushies, sometimes I see them using techniques and things that I'm just like, oh, why would you do that? One is using hand sewing too much. Some people will make a torso, a leg, some ears, and then just position them onto the torso and hand sew them. And I'm just like, that's not skill. That's just putting stuff together. Oh, it's kind of skill. I'm sorry, no one be offended. I just personally don't do that. I like to use sewing machine as much as possible. Because not only is that good for manufacturing, so it's good for practice to make things for manufacturing, but it makes things faster. Sewing machine stitches just look better. If you can master it, that is. Like, I used to hand sew all my heads onto bodies because I didn't trust myself to position heads. I mean, if you can imagine, the tiniest like deviation of angle on the head will just kind of change the character of a plushie. So I was kind of afraid to do that. Like doing it by hand will at least guarantee more accuracy. But now I can manage to do almost everything by machine. Okay, another pet peeve is when plushie artists, once again, like it's a peeve of mine, but I also don't want to offend anyone, is when artists use hot glue. I'm just like, first of all, if you gotta glue a thing, like hot glue is, in my philosophy, hot glue is only good for two things. If you want something quick, and if you want that bulk of hot glue. For any other reason, you should use contact cement You should use applique glue. You should use shoe glue, epoxy glue. Anything is better than hot glue, as far as I'm concerned. And stitching generally is much more preferred over glue. It's kind of like using glue in origami. Like, the funny thing is I like to compare sewing plushies to origami, and 3D modeling to sculpture, because, like I was explaining this the other day to some people, if you have a sculpture, so here's a sculpture example, here's a naked Mega Man thing. Let's say you want to make a nose on this sucker. In 3D modeling, you just need to pull a bit of material out and you got a nose. Same thing with sculpture, you can kind of like squish a nose onto him or take some material on the outside and plop it on, and there you got a nose. It's fine. However, in sewing and in origami, you don't have that kind of flexibility. You don't, if you're going to glue something or sew something to something else, you got to plan for that ahead. And the material you work with originally is flat. And there's an order of operations to it as well. Like I said, you got to plan for it beforehand. And just like origami, you can't try to make the crane's head before you make the crane's body, or something like that. I hope that made sense. And just like with origami, there's certain rules and philosophies. Like, sure, you can make something beautiful if you cut it and glue it, but some people have standards. I tend not to glue anything onto my plushies. Oh, this is a bad angle. Yeah. Just realized that. A bit better. Favorite game? It starts with a M and ends with a Etroid. That's my favorite game to make plushies from. Back when I had more time, I used to do little contests to see, like, I would post work in progresses of my plushies and see if anyone could guess what they are, and if they guess right, they win, and they can win a prize. And it became too easy because everyone just guesses Metroid stuff, and I'm like, yeah, it's a Metroid. The baby. You can see this, it's just coming along pretty nicely. So enough about me. How about you guys? Let's talk about you. Have you guys ever sewn stuff before? Anything. Doesn't have to be plushies. Ever hemmed some pants? Ever made some lunch bags in school? Oh, dang. Yeah, bags are fun to make. Oh, Alex, did I help you make one? I don't remember if I ever met you, or if you have. Like, I don't remember who you were. Yeah, designing is fun. Sometimes I get really inspired. Like, for example, that Kirby and Boo mask. Like, I just sat up, bolt upright in my bed and go like, I need to make a Kirby mask. And so I did. Oh, that's cool, Squid Girl. Hopefully you're gonna learn something here, and that will help further enhance your sewing techniques. And Toaster Doofus, are you sewing a Metroid right now? Are you sewing along with me? Space Coyote did cosplay. I did cosplay for a little while, and it's like a lot of fun to like walk around in your cosplay and have people be like, oh man, that's so cool. It's like a lot of validation. And I would do it more, but one, it's so time consuming. And two, like once I'm done with the cosplay, it's like, oh, what do I do with it, you know? The fandom has moved on. And also it's really expensive. I should pull up a picture of one of my old cosplays. I like cosplays with big masks, so I can hide my face. So I believe that, well, I just like to hide my face. Let me see if I can find a picture of one of my old cosplays. Picture is not. Is this photography? No, that's not right. Nope, can't find anything. No one will ever know. Well, okay, you can look it up on Google when you have the time. Look up Tempura Wizard cosplay and know that that is me. Yes, Tempura Wizard. You heard that correctly. No, I have photos. I'm just taking too long to look for them. Yeah, Vid has seen that that cosplay before. That head is mostly hollow. It's the inside is just a hollow wire mesh of chicken wire. Literally a wire mesh. Oh no, my DeviantArt! Ah, stay away! Anyways, alright, check it out. It's the front of the Metroid. And it's got some fairly clean nuclei, even though sewing it, there are some parts that I think were not that clean. Like this is all lumpy and weird. But if it looks fine on the outside, no one needs to know. Alright, now it's time to sew this to the rest of the body. Making the waistline, because you want to make skirts, but want to make the waistline stretchy with gathers and elastics. Is that a thing? Because when you have gathers, like, the gathers are sewn and... Oh, wait. I think I know what you're talking about. What is it called? Shoot, okay, I'm gonna stay up all night thinking about it. I think I know what you're talking about. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll teach you how to make gathers without elastic, without any kind of stretchy thing. Yeah, you know what? Let me do that right now while we're on the topic. Okay, I need a piece of fabric that's relatively light. Do I have anything here? Oh hey, parts of my wedding gown. I can use this. Okay, so all you need to do is make your machine have a very large stitch length and a very loose tension. Let's see if this works. And when you start, don't backstitch, just go. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Do it once. Do it twice. So it's 2 lines of stitching with very troublesome tension and large stitches. Ah, shoot. Shoot. Ah. Ah, shoot. Okay, sorry, everything just went awry for a second. Just, my thread came off the needle. Okay, check this out. You take the thread that's kind of, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the side that has the least tension. You can see both colors of thread on this particular side of the fabric. So you can see the kind of loops that the thread on the underside is making. So you grab the thread on this side. Okay, check it out. Check it out. And just kind of pull. Is this blowing your mind? You could do this with one line of stitching instead of two, but what you get with two is very even gathers. There we go. Check out this dress. Okay, I gotta put this on something. Oh yes, here we are. Oh, he's the most beautiful robot. Check out this Mega Man. And now you know. I hope that was helpful. Now back to your regularly scheduled Metroid. I gotta remember to change all my machine settings back. There's another way you can make gathers, there's a type of foot that's called a gathering foot. And you just freaking run your fabric right through using that foot and it will make little gathers for you. And if that's not enough gathering, then you can just run it through again and it will gather your gathers until it's super gathered. Alright, check it out. We have a Metroid dome. We turn it inside out. Yay! It's cute. Yeah. Now, next part. Where did I put everything? Dude, I was gonna say shearing, but I was like, oh no, that can't be right. Now you want to take your fangs and pin them where you want them to be. Let's see, how do I usually like this? I like to put the small fangs right underneath the nuclei. And the way I do it is, I don't like to make them flat, like following, like with the seam on either side. I like to actually give it some dimension by folding it or by like pressing on it this way so the seams are meeting. You see how this gives it a bit of dimension? So what I will do is I will just pin this. See, for the larger fangs, where do I like the larger fangs? I think us in the middle of the next big piece of fabric. This is a good place to place it. Okay, and now you take, what the heck is this? Here you go. Now you take your bottom piece of fabric that now has new parts all over it. Turn your Metroid back around. And you see the bottom piece also has tabs, and that kind of indicates where the top and bottom of your Metroid should be. So I'm going to take a tab and put it right against the seam on the middle, the center front of the Metroid. And I will take a pin and stick the tab on the bottom area to the center back of the Metroid. Carefully ease the rest of the Metroid dome into the bottom. Even though I pinned all the way around, there's going to be a part of this I'm not going to sew. Right in the back of the Metroid, between his two hind fangs, I'm not going to sew this part. I'm going to have to leave it open because I'm going to need a way to turn the Metroid inside out. Quite a lot of layers to sew through sometimes, because you're going to sew right through the top and the bottom and the fangs, their tops, their bottoms, their seam allowances, but your machine should be able to handle it. So once again, with the tweezers, I'm just constantly adjusting the fabric underneath where the pins aren't quite enough to hold everything together. almost done. I can't wait. Because my favorite part of making a plushie is the part where you turn it inside out. Because so far it's been an ugly duckling, and then it will metamorphosize like a Metroid and turn from an ugly little larvae into a beautiful alpha Metroid. Alright, so here we are. Just a little look at everything sewn together. You might want to check to make sure you caught all the fangs. Sometimes like the fangs will want to go inside and then you'll realize that, oh, I missed a corner. But no, all the corners are visible here. It's got a hole in the back. So we'll just grab this, turn it inside out. Yay! Yeah. Look at that. Deflated little Metroid. Boop. And here's where we're gonna stuff it. Since this is big and round, I'm not gonna bother with hemostats. There's no small parts for me to really use my hemostats to stuff into. But I'm still going to rip up pieces of stuffing and fluff them up a bit before I stuff them in. Man, I thought I could make 4 plushies in 3 hours instead of 1 plushie. Hubris. Yeah, I suppose that's true. And if I was just working by myself, I would be a lot more efficient to, if I was making 4 plushies, for example, to, sew all the body pieces together. Just go vroom, 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 and sew a bunch. Although sometimes I feel like I'm way too slow at making plushies. I mean, I know people who can just do things really fast, like manufacturers and stuff. I'm like, how do they do it so fast? Oh, the music stopped. I'll just refresh this. I would love to do another stream with you guys. I have ideas. I'm thinking next time, if there's a next time, wink wink, nudge nudge, I want to do design, like how to design a plushie. How do you get these pattern pieces? I will go through some fundamentals of how to achieve certain shapes, and then together we will make a plushie from scratch together, and I will just whip it together, and it's going to be terrible, but it's going to be a good start for whatever plushie we're going to make. And I could take suggestions. Oh, I have ideas, man! Let's see, I usually listen to just video game music or Let's Plays, watch Let's Plays, and then I get horribly distracted and it takes me even longer to make plushies. Yeah, I can teach the fundamentals of fabric manipulation and all that good stuff. So yeah, schedule me in for future streams. Oh, that would benefit both of us, Space Coyote, to help you draw out designs for making plushies. I mean, when I get plushie designs from Fangamer or Symbiote, I can tell sometimes that, oh, this person's never made a plushie before. The artist that has drawn the design, because I'm like, oh, how does this work? This ear goes right into the hair, and like, how do I make that work in 3D? It's also a lot of what's the word? It helps me grow a lot as well, to sometimes do things that at first I thought are impossible. Like, so many times I've looked at a design and go like, ooh, I'm gonna need to get back to them and say, hey, I can't do this, this is impossible. But I don't think I've ever done that. I've always kind of sat down and thought about it at night, and then just woke up in a cold sweat and went like, I got it. I can do this. I'll do it. And I did it. And I learned. Alright, I think this guy is sufficiently stuffed. Now it's time to sew his butt closed. Yeah, I'm sure the designers or the artists that draw the plushies are often under constraints as well. Like the IP holders or whomever might go like, "Hey, I want it to be like this and this and this," and then you're like, "Okay, I'll draw it, but I don't know if the plushie maker can make it." And I make it, and I go like, "Oh God, this is impossible." And then I make it, and then I go like, "I don't know if the manufacturers can do this," and the manufacturers do it, and it's like, "Okay, good, phew." Butt sewn closed as cruel punishment. Yeah, it's like opposite to human centipede. Haha. Yeah. It's alright, you might have seen my hands blur around to make the knot and to string this thread. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and... Oh, heck! I just realized I never taught you guys how to do the ladder stitch. Alright, so, okay, let me tell you now. This is called the ladder stitch, or... Shoot, there's another name for it. But I like to call it the ladder stitch because it makes a lot of sense. It looks like a ladder once you're done. So what you do is, this is the kind of stitch that you do if you want to sew on the outside of a plushie and kind of make it look like it's being sewn on the inside. So, oh, you know what ladder stitches are and you love them? Ooh, I've got secrets for you. Anyways, what you do is, as you sew, you kind of always want to sew where the seam allowance would be. So in this case, it would be kind of along this top edge, just 3/8 of an inch beyond the raw edge, as well as 3/8 of an inch along the raw edge at the bottom. So I will stick my needle into the opposite fabric at that distance and then take it out. And then you go to the opposite side of the fabric and do the same thing. Stick it in at the seam allowance and take it out along that seam allowance, a short distance away. Now here's the secret. Okay, let me get some paper because this is kind of a visual thing. Let me find a nice dark pen of sorts. Does such a thing exist? Okay. So let's say you have these two pieces of fabric and you're joining them by ladder stitch. Let me get a different color pen. No. Okay, so this is your thread. It's basically going to be like this. This is the concept, right? I don't know how clearly you can see this. You stitch into the fabric, you go out, you stitch in the fabric, you go out, and in the middle you make kind of a ladder. If you can see these rungs of the ladder. However, once you pull the fabric together, what it's going to look like, the two pieces of fabric are kind of going to look like this. They're going to look a little bit wavy, right? With just a little bit of thread between every wave. I'm going to hold this up so you can kind of see it a little more. There's a way to compensate for this waviness. What you do is instead of making straight stitches, you make, let's see how to do this, you actually go back just a slight bit. So your ladder rungs are uneven. You see, kind of like that. And when you pull it, it will therefore make less wobble. In the two pieces of fabric. Oh yeah, that's a little me secret. I'm not sure if I was ever taught this. I think I came up with it. Alright, I'll do that here. So, like, my eyeball tells me that this is directly across. This exact point is directly across from the point where my thread is. However, I want to go back slightly. Just slightly. Oh, that looks good. I don't know how much you can see, but when I pull it, it's straight. I should charge for this kind of information. Trade secrets, man. You may find as you're closing up the stuffing hole that you could use a bit more stuffing. So I usually go ahead and do that. Just give it an extra bit of stuff. Right at the end. Okay, and now that I'm done my ladder stitch, I'm going to go back a stitch. And tie it off. So I'm going to stick my needle into this thread, make a loop, make a bigger loop, make the small loop into a nothing loop, and I want extra security, so I'm going to make a third loop and treat it just like the little loop. There we go. And now to finish it off, I'm going to stick my needle right where the knot is and take the needle out somewhere far away so I can cut the thread without it being too close to the knot. Oh my god, I'm done. Ah, it's a Metroid! There we go. Now you can sell this on Etsy and be my competition. So, alright. I guess it's about time to go. Heck, it's almost 4 o'clock, and that's the hard deadline, if I understand correctly. So, goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Fangamer, for all of your support and all of your friendship. And all of your business. And thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for learning. I hope you make a lot of Metroids and help infest the galaxy with them. And I guess this is the end. Here. Bye everyone. Do, 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 do.